In Yemen, more than 10,000 Saudi-led coalition troops are headed toward the port city of Hodeidah to launch a new assault against Houthi rebels. Saudi government officials say the assault, backed by the United States, could begin within days.
Meanwhile, more than 500,000 people are now trying to flee Hodeidah amidst the escalating fighting and airstrikes. Hodeidah is the key port for the delivery of relief supplies and humanitarian aid into Yemen. And as it stands, the United Nations says that 10 million people in Yemen face starvation.
For more on that, let's bring in senior diplomatic correspondent Nina Larson. Nina, how's the situation in and around Hodeidah looking?
Well, it's not looking good for the rebels and for the civilian population that depends so heavily on safe passage of the very limited aid at the moment that can get in there, Tal. It looks like the Houthis are on a war footing. They're in a defensive posture. But there's 10,000 Saudi and UAE troops there, and plus Air Force reinforcements there from the sky. And we already know that Yemen has suffered thousands and thousands of daily airstrikes. It's really an impossible situation there. The Saudis say that their motivation for trying to take the port is that's under Houthi control at the moment and has been for some time, is that they accuse Iran of illicitly sending weapons in there to arm the Houthis, and it's very, very strategically important for every side at the moment.
And Nina, let's suppose that the Saudis are able to move in very quickly into Hodeidah. Is there still a possibility that some of the port infrastructure does not get damaged and very quickly they can reestablish the humanitarian aid that is flowing in?
Well, that's certainly the hope of the United Nations, David, and all those aid agencies that are still trying to function in there. UNICEF, for example, is one of the aid agencies that still has people on the ground. But we've seen that there's those shocking figures that have come out of Yemen this week, particularly concerning children, almost 2 million suffering from starvation. There is almost an official famine there, all but in name. But that's the big question. Will these strikes be surgical? Will that port actually survive? And what's the greater Saudi agenda here? And what role for the United States? They've really turned a blind eye, arguably, to the civilian casualties in this very, very brutal war over the past few years. And if this offensive does take place, then the U.S. is going to face some very difficult questions.
And Nina, some would say that the United States has more leverage at play right now following Khashoggi's murder to put further pressure on Saudi Arabia over Yemen. What's the latest on Khashoggi?
Yes, well, you'd think so, Tal, but the U.S. has always taken a very hesitant line on condemning outright any Saudi activities in Yemen. But let's go back to Khashoggi. Another twist in the tale here. Saudi investigators, including the chief prosecutor and the head of Saudi intelligence, are in Istanbul right now, and they've been in the consulate today. They've met with their Turkish counterparts, but apparently these discussions are not going well at all. There's a real stalemate. So the Saudis want the Turks to turn over this apparent audio evidence, these tapes that we've been hearing about in the Turkish media and the US media as well, that purport to detail the last moments of Jamal Khashoggi. But the Turks are saying, well, we need to see the body. And Khashoggi's poor fiancée has been attending a memorial service today in London, and she's demanding, I want to bury my fiancé, not just attend memorial services for him.
Nina Larson, our senior diplomatic correspondent, reporting from Washington. Nina, thank you.
To discuss the latest on the investigation into Khashoggi's murder, we want to continue here with Middle East analyst Shai Franklin. Shai, welcome. The Saudis, they have so far changed their narrative a couple of times. Lately, they admitted that Khashoggi's murder was premeditated. But what about the rest of their investigation? Are they working on the cover-up for the cover-up now?
They're always working on the cover-up for the cover-up. But right now, I think what's going on in Ankara and particularly in Istanbul is the two prosecutors are not meeting. They're not reviewing the evidence. What they're really doing is they're negotiating over what the Saudis will provide and whether the Turkish government will even provide all the evidence that they have. They're holding back the evidence that they've already provided to the United States and to the United States government. They're saying, we will give you all the evidence we have if you deliver the 18 Saudis that you say you've arrested who were implicated, and if you tell us where the body is.
Does the Saudi prosecutor have the power back in Saudi Arabia to make a claim and just draw a connection between the crown prince and this murder?
There's no separation of powers in Saudi Arabia. So he'll go as far as he's allowed to go, and that's what he'll do. It's not.
So in other words, no. I mean,
no, there's no
way he's going to put a finger on the crown prince and say this guy made the order the killing.
No, there's no Sam Waterston here.
He will turn into Khashoggi himself. What do you think?
Hercule Poirot is staying clear of this.
So you mentioned the audio recording, right? This element of the investigation. I think you're referring to the alleged audio recording of Khashoggi's interrogation and his murder. What do you think is happening with it? Why are the Turks holding it back? It's because if it was recorded secretly as a breach of international law?
Well, they've already intimated that they have it, so the breach is already there.
But it's not publicly.
And governments always spy on each other. I'm sure everybody's. If you recall, well, you may not recall. I'm old enough to recall 30 years ago when we rebuilt the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. They had to tear it down and rebuild it again because it was so filled with bugs. Listening devices. So and we didn't go to war with Russia, with the Soviet Union. I think that the Turkish government, they think they have the goods on the Saudis, but if they release the recordings, then they don't have the goods anymore. Then it's out there. So when you're trying to leverage, well, you want to hold back.
What is it that the Turks want? I mean, do they want the Saudis to pay up and say, you know, give them $500 million or whatever it is, and then we make this go away, and we want you to invest in various projects? I mean, what is it specifically they're looking?
Turkey is heading very quickly toward an economic crisis, which is not entirely the result of these aluminum and steel tariffs that were largely punitive by the United States against Turkey because of the American pastor who was being held. He's now been released, but they have a currency crisis. There are a lot of issues going on, and I think they want some investment, they want some trade. And they'd like some cash. The United States got $100 million from the Saudis overnight last week, and I think Turkey would like to get some of that too.
Shai Franklin, a Middle East analyst. Shai, thanks for being on with us. Appreciate it.
In Indonesia, a second day of searching has found no survivors in the crash of Lion Air passenger jet. It is believed that all 189 people on board were killed after the plane crashed into the sea just minutes after takeoff.
Indonesian government officials have ordered inspections of all Boeing 737 MAX 8 aircraft belonging to the national commercial airlines. Correspondent Stephanie Ramos has the story.
The Boeing jet that took off from Indonesia for a short 1-hour flight still hasn't been found, and the hopes to locate any survivors is fading. The Lion Air jet flight 610 crashed into the seas off Jakarta with 189 people aboard Monday morning. Within 2 to 3 minutes, the pilots reported technical difficulties and asked to return to the airport, but officials say they soon lost contact with the plane. 13 minutes after takeoff, it crashed into the Java Sea. This man says he hopes his father, who was on that plane, survived and is just hoping for the best. So far, just 10 of the victims have been recovered. U.S. authorities are now questioning, was this an accident or terrorism? They say an Indonesian national on the U.S. no-fly list may have been on the flight. Indonesian officials say search and rescue teams are working around the clock to find the plane's fuselage and black box using divers and underwater detection. But the chief of the Indonesian Search and Rescue Agency says bad weather is slowing them down. Boeing says the practically brand new 737 MAX 8 plane is one of the most recent versions of the jet.
Almost all of Indonesian commercial aviation is quite poor as well. It was not only until a couple of years ago that aviation officials allowed Indonesian airplanes to fly into the United States.
That was Stephanie Ramos reporting. For more, we're joined by Keith Mackey, an aviation expert and owner of Mackey International, an aviation consulting firm. Keith, the black box from the airplane hasn't been recovered yet. All we know is that it wasn't a weather condition issue. From what you're reading into this incident so far, what does it look like to you? A technical failure, a human mistake?
Well, there are a lot of things that we have to look at. We don't have a lot of information. When we do recover the boxes, we'll know a great deal more. I'm surprised they haven't gotten them already because the water's relatively shallow, but eventually they will recover them. The only thing we do know that's been announced recently is that there was some issue with the pilot's instruments on the previous flight. The captain's airspeed and altimeter were not reading properly. The co-pilot took the flight over and landed it. Now, what we don't know is, were these the same pilots that had the problem that took the airplane out, or a different crew that may not have been aware of the previous problem? This could be a very serious thing. If the pilots had incorrect instrument indications and they reacted improperly to them, This could have caused the incident. We had the Air France 447 crash in 2009, where that's exactly what happened. The what we call the pitot tube, this instrument that senses the airspeed, iced up. The heater didn't work on it, and the pilots reacted improperly, resulting in the loss of 228 lives. So this is not an unheard of thing, and it will certainly come forefront in the investigation.
And Keith, that investigation will include Boeing, since they made this aircraft and it was only in service for a couple of months, a relatively new delivery. What will Boeing be doing when they go to Indonesia to participate in this investigation?
Well, in any crash investigation, all the parties that are involved are invited, and that would include the manufacturer of the airplane, the same with the engines, the country of the accident, the country registry of the airplane. So Boeing's going to be very interested in the things that we just discussed. They're going to go over the wreckage as it's recovered and to try to find anything else that might have been amiss. I'm not sure that they're going to find a great deal. This is a new airplane, and it is while it's a relatively new model of the airplane, it's still the basic design that has been around for about 40 years. It's just been a great airplane and very, very popular amongst the world's airlines.
How unusual is that for a new airplane to have a technical failure, a technical problem?
Well, it's very unusual. It's, I think, just a coincidence that it happened to be a new airplane. I really don't think that had anything to do with the cause of the accident. I would be very surprised if it did.
What about Indonesia's track record? I mean, there's some indications that they don't do such a great job of inspecting the planes or providing the sort of updates and inspections that are supposed to happen every 30 or 60 days.
Well, here's the problem. We're dealing with countries that are relatively new to aviation. They have a great demand for aviation because of the fact that the country is spread out over a number of islands. The economy's good. People are more affluent. They can afford to fly. Hence, airlines like Lion Air has grown very rapidly and probably outpaced the ability of the company to find experienced and well-qualified people to not only fly the airplanes, but also to maintain them. So I think this is an ongoing problem, and it's not just in this part of the world. It's in many other places in the world also. And this is something we're going to have to be careful of if we're going to keep our safety record as good as it is.
You know, Keith, when people watch these kind of stories about airplanes crashing in the waters, there's usually a lot of panic around this. Do you have a no panic message to us, to our viewers?
No, I really don't. This is a very unusual thing. Air travel is a safe mode of transportation as there is. I think that we're going to find that there are some lessons to be learned by this accident that can be corrected in the future. We don't know the cause yet, but when we do, we'll certainly apply the lessons that we've learned going forward, hopefully, and prevent things like this from happening again, at least in the same sequence that this accident happened.
Keith Mackey is an aviation expert, owner of Mackey International, an aviation consulting firm. And Keith, thanks for joining us.
You're very welcome.
No reassuring message
until they
Keith.
know what happened.
Yeah, we should learn from it. All right, coming up here on Crossroads, President Trump vows to issue an executive order ending birthright to some people born in the United States. But even the House Speaker says Mr. Trump cannot, on his own, overturn a constitutional amendment.
And one of the hottest midterm races is the Texas Senate race with Ted Cruz. We'll take a closer look.